Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Deborah Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
In just a minute, our Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. Changing culture one man at a time. The goal of Men in Iron is to equip men to know God and their purpose through their faith, family, and friends. We will talk to the president of the organization and a man that was impacted by the ministry.
Don't try to do life alone, right? Well, here's a little trivia on the road to Super Bowl 59. The first AFC-NFC championship known as Super Bowl I took place January 15th, 1967. A ticket to see the Chiefs and the Packers face off cost just $12. This year, the average ticket price is a mere $8,076, but I heard you can get them for $4,000 now, Deborah.
Unbelievable.
But it's the Super Bowl side hustle where the big money is. Last year, 26% of Americans bet on the game. 26%, wagering more than $23 billion in bets. That number is expected to rise again this year. With gambling addiction sweeping communities and most American pastors opposed statistically to sports betting, why are so few of them, speaking out against the dangers of gambling?
Yeah, I don't understand why you bet on sports.
You tell me.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
This morning.
Well, many Christian leaders have voiced opposition to sports on Sunday. An example inspired by Olympian Eric Liddell, who famously refused to run on the Sabbath. Because of that, Christian athletes took a stand against playing on Sunday. Today, many Christian athletes are increasingly bold to sharing the gospel on public platforms. So what are the pros and cons of including Christianity as part of an athlete's personal brand?
Well, a lot has changed since Eric Liddell and Chariots of Fire. You remember the movie. But today, I think Christians are taking stands in different ways and in some good ways, very encouraging
I think
ways.
it's great after you watch a game and you see them kneeling down and praying or pointing up to God.
Reminding people where their strength comes from.
Certainly.
Well, this week marks 121 February since Jim Thorpe, a member of the Sauk and Fox tribe, enrolled in the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, beginning a career earning Olympic glory and distinction as one of the greatest athletes of all time. But it was the game of all games, a 27-6 victory over Army at West Point against star linebacker and future President Dwight D. Eisenhower, adding an unbelievable plot twist to his cinematic life. But we've learned a lot about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School since, especially its mission of replacing Native culture and customs and religion. So what have we learned? What are the lessons of this late 19th and 20th century experiment in Christian education to keep us from repeating the mistakes of those well-meaning Quakers? We're going to ask those questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. Pastor David Smith, welcome back.
Morning,
Glad to have you here. Good to have you. And Rebecca James, always a delight to have
Pleasure.
you. I gave you some easy questions today.
Oh, you've got this.
These are hard ones because when I was in the legislature, the gaming industry was pushing slot machines, and by hook and by crook, they eventually got the votes to pass the largest expansion of gambling in the history of Pennsylvania, in history of the world, actually. But sports betting is something that, because of the way it's branded, it looks fun. It really appeals to young men. Many, many young men, we know statistically, have fallen into that trap. But pastors know the dangers. Why do you think, you as a pastor, pastors seem unwilling to go there? Is it because too many of their members are compromised? Is it because it's just complicated?
It seems as if, as Francis Schaeffer would say, that oftentimes the church is maybe 20 years behind what the culture is dealing with and fighting. So sometimes I don't think it's that Christian pastors just won't talk about it. I'm not sure they're aware of it, the dangers, Jeff. I'm not sure they understand what's happening.
They're not in that space.
Exactly, and it's not something they necessarily see on a Sunday morning, although because we have cell phones, most people are probably engaging in it. I want to trust that my brethren in the pulpit, if they were aware of the dangers that are obvious now, as we see some of the numbers, would speak against it and really clearly teach what the Bible says.
But David, there's grace for that, and this is their money. God wants you to have fun with your money. Why not a little bit on the side?
Well, stewardship, right? God has given us finances to care for His kingdom, to care for the church, also to care for our families, to care for society. And I think we begin to put our hope in whether I'm going to win or lose. And that could be, by the way, not just sports gambling. It could be the Pennsylvania lottery. It could be going out here to Hershey, to one of the casinos. It could be any number of things that we're building our hope on that victory, and then that's what's going to sustain me. When clearly our relationship with Christ should be the most sustaining thing that we have.
Okay, that's a very interesting argument. It's you're putting your hope in the promise of something, which for the minute wipes away your
And it does
anxiety.
satisfy for that second, I assume.
Yeah. What do you think, Rebecca? Do you have a different take or a personal experience? Or?
I have a similar take, but my maternal grandfather, who I only met a couple of times, lost the entire family fortune to gambling. So, it affects generations.
How did you know that? How did you find that out?
From my mother.
Okay.
And growing up and hearing the stories, and it was hard for her, and it affected the family and separated the family, and gambling's tough, particularly for young men who are risk takers, right? By nature, risk takers. I think it affects 4 to 5% of men and only 1% of women, but you have to follow the money. There's nothing profitable in giving back to mankind through gambling, right? It's not, these enterprises and the bookies, those are who are making this tremendous amount of money, and it's not the people. And I remember I was mentioning to you, I remember when they said, oh, well, we're going to open these casinos in Pennsylvania, one right near us, and we're going to eliminate property taxes.
Right.
And they sold it, to the public as this is a good thing. We're going to give back to humanity and to the community. And not only did that not happen, but our taxes went up.
I remember one of the arguments was we would need to keep people here instead of driving across the border to West Virginia or to Atlantic City.
Right.
I mean,
keep the revenue here.
Interesting strategy. Let's keep talking sports. The big game is coming up. And the idea of Christian athletes is not a new one. We've talked about our Chariots of Fire hero, Eric Liddell, who famously during the Olympics refused to run and was placed in a different race and, of course, wins the gold medal in the race he wasn't preparing to run for. But you have very few examples now of people drawing that kind of line. Instead, probably from the 1960s forward, pastors have encouraged athletes to use their platform. If you're going to be participating on Sunday, use your platform to promote your relationship with God. There are some that might look at that and say putting a verse on your shoe or on your helmet is a different, isn't going far enough, or perhaps giving the impression that if you put that scripture on, you're asking God for the victory, and He's only there for you when you win. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think obviously
you're a former athlete, still an athlete, right?
Thank you for that reminder, brother. It's been many moons ago. I think as we consider our role and our responsibility in culture at large, it is very easy to put the verse underneath your eyes if you're a football player, a baseball player. It's very easy to tattoo it on your arm or something like that. It's much more difficult to live it out day by day by day. I remind you the 80s Lakers. Most people remember Showtime with Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But who they may not know is A.C. Green. A.C. Green was a virgin until he got married. Through all the 80s, through all the partying, through all that was happening on those Lakers teams who were winning championships, he kept his virginity and he kept his stance. Why? For Christ. He was a silent witness behind the scenes that simply day in, day out held on to his faith, even in the midst of all that was happening. So, Jeff, I think it's more so how we handle losses. How we handle temptations in the throes of things, as opposed to just putting the verse on. Again, I'm not opposed to that, but I'm saying that's kind of simple. It's much harder to live it out.
Yeah. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, and I think people view you in holding you to this higher standard, especially people who are adverse to Christianity. Right. So it may or may not be a good witness because man is fallible. But and I agree with you wholly. I will know you by your actions, and you will win people by your actions. I'm not saying you shouldn't add it as your brand, and maybe when Tim Tebow did John 3:16, it was the most Googled words for days, and that was a good thing.
And I think other Christian athletes who are saying, look, by the way, I'm not pointing you to me. I'm pointing you to Christ, because when you look at my life, you see all the cracks and the imperfections. Often, An honest story of grace is probably what we want out of our athletes.
I agree.
Let's talk briefly about what the AP once called the greatest athletes of all times, at least for the first 50 years of the 20th century. Jim Thorpe, of course, not from Mauch Chunk, Pennsylvania. They brought his body from Oklahoma. Mauch Chunk bought it, the rights to Jim Thorpe. But you've got this athlete who is inextricably connected with the Carlisle Indian School, a school that the Quakers started really as an enterprise to kind of reform and assimilate Indians into the mainstream of the culture. For some, maybe not a bad idea, but we've learned a lot, I think, about how we take children through a Christian school system and expect a certain outcome. That if you do these things, regimented things, and you read the Bible and do all these things, you're going to produce a good young man or young woman. What are your thoughts on what we've learned from the early 20th century, late 19th century to today about training up children?
Well, first of all, you can raise all your children the same way and expect an outcome, and they all go different ways. You have no control over that. I often say, I can't take credit for my children's successes because I can't blame myself for their failures as a parent. But in terms of assimilation, we were talking earlier, when you try to assimilate people to your organization, you have certain values. It's, when you're forming the United States, you're trying to assimilate what those people to what the values are of freedom and working hard, and at that time, Christianity. And sometimes I do think the approach can be, particularly in Christian schools, I've seen people rebel against that.
Because you can get people to say the words.
That's right.
Right? But they have to, at some point, David, encounter a real relationship with God, and that usually comes, it seems to me, through failure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, as you said, even with athletes, walking through the grace that is necessary to repair, to be restored, to be rebuilt, which can only come from God. It's not a regiment. It's not some kind of elixir I can give you. It's something that only God can do in a heart. Jeff, but when I think about the school and how education and maybe even missions has changed as opposed to what it was, ethnocentrism, we equated in those years American Christianity, American values, how we dressed, how we looked.
Yeah.
We equated that with Christianity and wanted to really stamp that on everyone, whether it be the Carlisle Indian School or even outsourcing it to missions in Africa or to some quote unquote third world. You've got to wear a three-piece suit and you've got to. So we're denying their culture that God made. I think we've come a long way in understanding that transforming their outward appearance means absolutely nothing. We've got to work on or see God working on the inside of their hearts.
On the heart. That's the final word, and a
Thank
great
you.
one it is. Thank you both very, very
welcome,
much.
my brother.
Well, through leadership, accountability, and mentorship, Pennsylvania organizations helping men find their identity in Christ in all aspects of their lives. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
Proverbs 27:17 teaches us that iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Men of Iron fulfills that mission through leadership, accountability, and mentorship programs. Joining me now is the president, Ryan Zook. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Talk to us about Men of Iron.
Yeah, so Men of Iron is a Christian nonprofit. We exist to change a culture one man at a time. So we believe the best way to have an impact on all of culture is just to work one man at a time, because when one man changes, he changes everybody around him, and we see it time and time and time again.
So how does it work? How does it play out?
Yeah. So we have a lot of different resources that work together to get men to know God and know their purpose. What we're trying to do with every man is to get them in a one-on-one mentorship, where one guy who's a little bit further ahead in his faith can invest in another guy who's just a couple seasons behind him. And again, we just see over and over how much of a huge change that makes in that one man's life, and then how much of a difference it makes in his family, in his work, in his community, in his church. So it's really effective.
So how does it play out as far as what do they do? Give us some examples.
So we have a blend of content. So we have a lot of free resources that we can get to people that just encourages them in areas of faith, family, friends, fitness, and finances. And so we have those free resources guys can have access to. Then we have groups that we use in churches and in businesses. We're just getting guys to encourage each other, to be accountable to each other. And then ultimately we have this one-on-one mentorship that we do with individuals, we do in churches, we do in businesses. And the way it works is we just hold each other accountable, and like we believe iron sharpens iron, those men sharpen each other and they become more effective in their faith and their family and their friends, fitness and finances.
And what are some examples of when you say faith, fitness?
Yeah. We have a story of a guy named Sean. He's down in Tampa Bay. We have a rep down there, and he picked up one of our free devotionals that's just a 30-day devotional on how to take your faith more seriously. And so he started doing it, and his wife was interested in it, so he started doing it with his wife. Then his kids were interested. They wanted in on it as well. And so it made a huge difference in his life and then in his family's life. And actually, we were just down in Tampa Bay 2 months ago, and he's currently leading a small group of men that are trying to take their faith more seriously. So that ripple effect of one guy just taking a simple step to grow in his faith is affecting now a whole church community, and we believe an even bigger community than that.
Yeah, this sounds like a wonderful
awesome.
program for women, too.
Yeah.
So how did this all come about?
Yeah, in 2005, our founder, Brian Zemer, he went to a Willow Creek conference, and the speaker talked about holy discontent, like what is it that really bothers you? And he believed that it was when men don't live up to their purpose. So he wanted to do something about that. So he came back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and launched this mentorship program at Victory Church. And it started with 10 mentors and 10 proteges. And that has just expanded year over year to now we've impacted like thousands of guys.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when you say you've impacted that many people, what type of differences are you seeing
goodness.
being made?
When one guy starts to take his faith seriously, it makes a difference in everything around him. So just like that story about Sean in Tampa Bay, he started to care better for his wife. He started to care better for his kids. He started to improve his performance at work because he's trying to honor God. He truly knows God. He truly knows his purpose, and he's thriving in that. And so we see that in Sean's life in Tampa, but we actually saw that in 2,500 guys' lives last year. So the ripple effect is enormous, and it keeps getting bigger every year.
So what is the main message to men who are watching this morning?
Yeah.
How to get started, if they're a part of your program or if they're not
Sure.
a part of your program, how can you encourage them?
Ultimately, we want men to know God and know their purpose. So we believe that when you know God, you'll start to thrive in who you're made to be, and you'll have a better effect on your community around you. So if you want to be part of that, we encourage you to reach out to us. You can find us at menofiron.org, and we can help get you in a group. We can help get you into a mentorship, whatever it is that you need to help you thrive in your faith, we can do that for you.
And it seems like it's what you're really encouraging is you can't do this alone.
100%. You can't do it alone. You need somebody just a little bit further ahead of you because iron sharpens iron.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us
thank you.
and sharing your mission.
Yeah.
And coming up next on Morning Light, we just heard the mission of Men of Iron. Next, we will hear how a central Pennsylvania man was impacted by this ministry. We're back in 1 minute. Welcome back. He struggled with drugs and alcohol, but Men of Iron helped sharpen his faith and walk with the Lord. Here to share his testimony is Steve Glick. Steve, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Share your journey with us.
Yeah, sure. So I had a really great upbringing as a kid. Grew up in the church, Bible school, went to church every Sunday. Probably in like my late teens, kind of started to just run away from God. I went off to college, and it just didn't really want anything to do with God at the time. And just started pursuing things that were of the world and not of God. So chasing after the party scene at school, got into drugs and alcohol. My life really in my early 20s was just kind of taking a downward spiral, just kind of a destructive path. And it was around 26, 27, my dad invited me on a missions trip to Mississippi, and I thought, hey, a free trip, like this sounds like a great thing. But it was on that trip, a week with my dad and around other men who loved Jesus and just helping people that were going through a hard time. And it was around that time that God started to stir in my heart. And I could tell something was happening, but I didn't know what. It was probably around a year later, I was offered an opportunity to go on another mission trip, this time to Liberia, Africa, which was way outside of my comfort zone. But for some reason, and looking back, it was God, I went on this trip, and the Lord just totally wrecked me on that trip. I could see back home the destructive life I was living, and I was like, man, I don't want any more of this. And it was on that trip that I just surrendered it all to the Lord and gave my life to Jesus.
Oh my goodness. I mean, how did that make the difference? I mean, how could you tell that this was something that I need to really stop? Because, I mean, if it's something that you were really addicted to drugs and alcohol and things like that, how did you make that transformation?
I go back to my upbringing, to my parents. They continued to pray for me during these dark seasons, and I knew the right thing to do. I knew in my heart, but I just wanted to chase after all these other things for all those years. So when I kind of had that come to Jesus moment in Liberia, Africa, I knew the right thing to do, and I couldn't do it anymore, live this life of destruction and drugs and alcohol. So it was on that opportunity, on that trip, where I was just like, Lord, I'm yours, I'm surrendered. I want to start a new life.
Yeah, that is wonderful.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with Men of Iron?
So the really cool thing is Men of Iron was founded out of Victory Church, as Ryan mentioned, and it was through Victory Church, where my dad was attending, that I got a chance to go on the first missions trip and then the one to Liberia, Africa. So after coming back from Africa, probably 5 months later, I saw signups for Men of Iron. Usually they did it once a year. It's a 12-month program, and I was just hungry for more Jesus, more opportunity for spiritual growth. So when the signups for Men of Iron came, I was all over it. I signed up. I was the first one back to the table at the end of the service.
Wow, it really does show you that God has a plan. He has the blueprint
Amen.
for your life, and
Amen.
It's just a matter of you following it. And what type of difference now, since you're working there with Men of Iron, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's been an awesome opportunity. That's a whole nother God story, just the opportunity to work for Men of Iron. And obviously I've been through the mentorship program, 6, 7 times, even prior to joining Men of Iron. And now as an employee, I go through it as well, helping other men. So it's made an enormous impact in my life. Just the spiritual growth, I'm a husband and a father now, just the growth that I've seen in those areas and being able to instill kind of the things I've learned into my family, it's just been a huge blessing.
What type of difference are you making for others?
That's a great question. Now I like to use the things I've learned, my testimony, to help other men. So I'm always trying to stay involved in mentorships, and just help men grow, help them be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, that is certainly great news to hear. For our viewers watching who may be walking in your shoes, what advice do you have for them?
I would say just keep going, and you can't do this on your own. You really need another man walking alongside you who's been maybe through the same struggles, who's a few seasons ahead of you. You need somebody to help you. God did not design us to do life alone. So I would just encourage any man out there to reach out to Men of Iron, reach out to maybe a man who loves Jesus and you just want to be more like him, and just get the help that you need.
Certainly reach out to your pastor, but
sure.
don't travel this journey by yourself. There are certainly people out there who are willing to help you.
Yes, 100%.
Thank you for sharing your journey, and congratulations on how you're doing today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. And for more information about Men of Iron, check out menofiron.org. Stay with us. We're back right after the break. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow on Morning Light, a congregation of bikers bound by their faith and love for the open road is on a mission to reach unchurched riders. Plus, are unhealthy habits keeping you from God's plan for your life? How Celebrate Recovery can help you find some clarity. And that's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
Deborah, I'm really excited about that segment with you. Of course, we've seen Doc Bauer, the pastor of Biker Church, on here before, but going in depth, it's going to be important. It is a place, a community where you feel the love of Christ from the minute you walk in the door.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the way they go about doing things, it will be interesting to hear how they share the gospel and the difference that they're making, really.
It's authentic, and and I think Doc will reinforce it tomorrow, you come as you are. So can't wait for the show. Well, in the opening pages of Pennsylvania's incredible story, there was a prohibition on gambling, thanks to William Penn, long thought to rob people of the fruits of their labors. For over 300 years, we've been debating in the legislature just how much or how little we believe the law should protect we the people from ourselves. Penn and his Quaker brethren knew that if there was a shortcut to making money, to wealth, we'd be tempted to take that easy road. But I think now he and we know something else about gambling. Gambling kills initiative. It robs us of the dignity of hard work. And it's a thrill, as our panel said this morning, that lasts only a few seconds at best. And the cost to society in addiction, in bankruptcy, in crime, and all the associated costs to society is a massive cost that most of us are not willing to pay. The gaming industry, the gambling industry, spends millions every single year, sometimes by the month, convincing us we've got a real shot against these unfathomable odds. Look, so many of our neighbors need help. We know that. And we also know that every time we look to government, government isn't big enough to meet every one of those needs. That's why so many of us have always said that that's where churches and families and people like you and me have to pitch in. That's why we have community and social organizations that are nonprofits. But we can't do any of that good work if we're not being good stewards of the resources that God has given us. And to that, we're going to have to take a pass on gambling. So here's a challenge to you. Super Bowl Sunday, enjoy the game. Go to church first, enjoy the game, but then pass on making the bet. For Deborah and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check on your neighbors. God willing, we'll see you again right back here tomorrow morning.